Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. If you're using this to fall asleep, get cozy, and relax, don't forget to subscribe, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Alright, let's get into the story. Growing up in the 1970s and 1980s, I was one of those kids who had the kind of freedom that seems almost unimaginable today. Like most kids in my small town in the southern United States, I could roam the neighborhood with minimal rules. As long as my parents had a vague idea of where I was and I made it home by a certain time, I was free to explore. Crime wasn't unheard of in our town, but it was rare enough that parents didn't hover. They trusted us to be okay, and that trust gave us a kind of independence kids today might never know. My favorite thing in the world was riding my bike. It was a cheap, huffy dirt bike, black with orange plastic dirt fenders, nothing fancy, but it was mine. I didn't have many friends as a kid, so I never had to worry about anyone poking fun at my no-frills bike. That bike was my ticket to adventure, reliably carrying me wherever I wanted to go. On weekends, I'd ride it all over the neighborhood, alone but content. I'd pedal up and down the streets near my house or head a few blocks over to the elementary school, where I'd spend hours jumping curbs and weaving through the empty parking lot. My parents didn't give me many rules, but there was one they were strict about. I was never allowed to ride my bike to Spring Street, the busiest road near our house. Spring Street was lined with businesses, including an arcade that, for a kid growing up in the Atari-fueled 1980s, was practically paradise. Arcades might sound old-fashioned now, but back then, having one nearby was as good as it got. The only problem: to get to the arcade, I had to cross Spring Street, the one thing I was explicitly forbidden from doing. This story happened when I was about 10 years old. I'd spent the week saving up my lunch money, $1 a day, until I had $5 tucked away. I'm not sure if I was on a reduced lunch plan for low-income kids or if school lunches were just that cheap in the 80s, but either way, $5 was enough to make me feel rich. At the arcade, $5 got you 20 tokens plus 4 free ones for a total of 24. That was enough to keep me entertained for hours. I stuffed the money in my pocket, told my mom I was going to ride around the neighborhood, grabbed my bike, and set off for the arcade, fully aware I was about to break my parents' one big rule. My neighborhood was small and oddly isolated, like something you'd build in The Sims, set apart from the rest of town. There were only 2 roads connecting it to Spring Street. The first was a moderately busy route with plenty of houses along the way, a straight shot to the arcade. But I knew that if my parents happened to drive towards Spring Street, that's the road they'd take, and I couldn't risk them spotting me. So I chose the back way, a quieter road that was far less traveled. It was about 2 miles long, lined on both sides by thick bushes, tall trees, and a wide creek. To my knowledge, there was only one house on that road, and I rarely rode there because it always felt a little creepy. But my parents never used that road, and with the arcade calling my name, I figured it was my safest bet. As I pedaled through the winding streets of my neighborhood, I noticed a large blue pickup truck driving around aimlessly. It seemed to zigzag through the streets, as if the driver was looking for something, or someone. I saw it 2 or 3 times on my way to the back road, crossing paths with it at different points. It wasn't following me exactly, but its presence was hard to ignore. I didn't think much of it at the time and didn't bother looking at who was driving. My mind was focused on 2 things: not getting caught by my parents and getting to the arcade. When I reached the back road, I turned onto it, relieved to be one step closer to my destination. I forgot to mention earlier, but this road had no exits, no side streets, no turnoffs, just a straight path from my neighborhood to Spring Street, with the arcade a little farther down once you hit the main road. I made it about half a mile when I heard the low rumble of an engine behind me. It struck me as odd because I couldn't remember ever seeing a car on this road before. I kept pedaling but moved over to the side to let the vehicle pass. Glancing back, I realized it wasn't a car. It was the same blue pickup truck I'd seen in my neighborhood. In my mind, it looked like the kind of truck Lamont drove in the opening credits of Sanford and Son, maybe from the 1950s or 60s. Light blue with a big, rounded hood and huge, bulging headlights. The truck was rusted in spots and made a heavy, distinctive chugging sound. I figured the driver was just out for a Saturday morning cruise and would pass me soon. But it didn't. Within moments, the truck was right behind me, about 15 feet from my back tire, matching my pace perfectly. It didn't get closer, but it didn't fall back either. I thought maybe I wasn't giving it enough room to pass, so I veered as far to the right as I could without slipping off the asphalt into the bushes and trees. Still, the truck didn't speed up or try to go around me. I pedaled faster. The truck sped up. I slowed down. The truck slowed down. No matter what I did, it stayed exactly 15 feet behind me. This went on for another half mile, which might not sound like much, but to a 10-year-old kid on a bike, alone on a creepy road with a strange truck tailing him, it felt like an eternity. I remembered that the only thing on this road, besides the bushes and trees, was that single house. As I rounded a curve, I saw it up ahead, a few hundred feet away. I knew my dad was friends with a guy who lived there, but as a kid, I didn't know the man's name or anything about his family. I made a split-second decision. I'd speed up suddenly and make a break for the house's driveway. I pumped my legs as hard as I could, and the truck, caught off guard, roared to life and chased after me. It didn't try to pass me, but it closed the gap, getting dangerously close to my back tire, maybe 5 or 6 feet away. It still didn't hit me, but the closeness was terrifying. I stole a glance at the driver and saw an older man with glasses, small, squinting eyes, and a hat. He was wearing overalls, and I'm sorry for another 80s reference, but he reminded me of the grandpa from Eha. There was something unsettling about his face, blank yet somehow angry. The driveway was close now, and I was panicking, my heart pounding in my chest. Somehow, I managed to pull myself together enough to form a plan. I'd rush into the driveway, pretend the house was mine, and see what happened. I veered into the driveway and pedaled toward the front door. The man in the blue truck pulled up perpendicular to the driveway, blocking the road so I couldn't escape. The driveway was flanked by a wall and bushes, so with his truck stretched across the entrance, I was trapped. I got off my bike and pretended to inspect it, fiddling with the spokes and chain to buy time. I glanced at the truck, trying not to lose it, and heard the driver's door creak open. The man stepped out and started limping around the front of the truck toward me. His limp made the whole scene even more terrifying, like something out of a nightmare. I was about 20 feet from the front door of the house. I decided I'd walk to the door, open it, and step inside. I'd explain who I was to the homeowner and hope they'd understand. As I walked toward the house, I kept looking over my shoulder. The man was stumbling closer, his face still blank, maybe with a hint of anger. Then he spoke in a flat, hollow voice. "Where you going, son?" I can still hear those words in my head, chilling and empty. I didn't answer. I quickened my pace, practically run-walking the rest of the way to the door. The man stopped abruptly, turned, and hobbled back to his truck, muttering something like, "I'm back, I'm going back." I was so focused on getting to the door that I couldn't be sure exactly what he said. I reached the porch, climbed steps, and heard him slam his truck door shut. As I grabbed the doorknob, I heard the engine roar and the tires screech as he peeled out and sped away. I turned the knob, and the door was locked. No one was home. My breath caught in my throat, and I collapsed onto the porch, sobbing uncontrollably. The man's creepy face, his limp, his hollow voice, it was all too much. The relief of him driving away mixed with the terror of what had just happened, and I broke down. I knew I couldn't stay there. The man might come back. The house was about halfway between my neighborhood and Spring Street, so I had to choose ride toward the arcade or head back home. I decided to go home. I got on my bike and started pedaling back toward my neighborhood. About halfway down the road, I saw another car coming my way. Still shaken and unable to hold it together, I threw my bike down, scrambled up the embankment about 10 feet, and sat there with my head in my hands, crying again. The car slowed down, and the people inside must have thought it was strange to see a kid in such a state. A man was driving, with a woman in the passenger seat and 2 kids in the back. They asked if I was okay, but I couldn't answer, just kept sobbing. Then I realized I recognized them. It was the family who lived in the house, my dad's friends, though I still didn't know their names. The woman got out, knelt beside me, and asked again if I was okay. I managed to choke out what had happened. She gave me a side hug, rubbed my hair to calm me down, and told me it was going to be okay. The man put my bike in their trunk, and they drove me home. When we got there, the woman explained everything to my mom. My mom hugged me, but she and the family seemed to downplay the whole thing, as if I'd misunderstood or made it up. That made me even more upset, like they didn't believe me. The woman mentioned that she didn't know anyone with a blue truck, and since the man had no business stopping at their house, it might be worth calling the police. But my mom was more focused on being mad that I tried to ride to Spring Street. No police were called. I never saw that blue truck or the creepy old man again, but that day haunted me for years. Even now, when I think about it too much, it still sends a shiver down my spine. The arcade, the tokens, the thrill of breaking the rules, it all faded into the background, overshadowed by the terror of that lonely road and the man in the blue truck. 2 years ago, during my first year at sixth form college, I was 16, navigating the chaos of studying art and psychology while lugging around heavy sketchbooks and binders stuffed with notes. I'm 19 now, but back then my routine was predictable. My back and chest issues meant I couldn't carry heavy loads for long, so I usually took the bus home. On lighter days, when I wasn't weighed down by my supplies, I'd walk. It was about a 30-minute trek from college to my house, and I often walked with a friend. But on this particular winter day, my friend had gotten a ride home with someone else, leaving me to make the journey alone. It was already dark when I set off, the winter sky swallowing the daylight early. To get home, I had two options: cut through the actual park, which added about 20 minutes to my walk since it was sprawling, or take a shortcut through a densely wooded area between the park and a nearby housing estate. A dirt path wound through the woods, shaving roughly 10 minutes off my journey. It was a popular route, dog walkers used it all the time, so I never felt uneasy about it. I'd pop in my earphones, let music drown out the world, and walk on autopilot until I hit the main road. The woods were pitch black that evening, the trees so thick they blocked out any stray light. I was moving quickly, lost in my music, not paying much attention to my surroundings. It wasn't until I was halfway down the path that I noticed a faint flickering light up ahead, partially obscured by the trees. As I got closer, I realized it was a bonfire, right in the middle of the woodland, just off the dirt path. A man stood beside it, his body turned sideways, staring into the flames. He was too far for me to make out his face, but I could see he was holding something white in his hand, a letter, maybe a photograph. He was tossing things into the fire, one after another. Near his feet were two black trash bags, barely visible in the dark. If it weren't for the fire's glow, I wouldn't have noticed them at all. It struck me as odd, even suspicious. Who builds a bonfire in the middle of the woods at night? But we weren't far from the housing estate, so I rationalized it. Maybe he was burning old bills, bank statements, or letters stuffed with personal information you can't just toss in the bin. It was weird, sure, but I didn't dwell on it. I just wanted to get home. I was only a few minutes from the main road, and from there, it was a quick 5-minute walk to my house. I kept moving, my music still playing, my pace steady. As I neared the edge of the tree line, something made me glance over my shoulder. My stomach dropped. The man was no longer by the fire. He was standing in the middle of the dirt path, about 25 feet behind me, silhouetted against the faint glow of the flames. The fire was still burning. He hadn't put it out. He started walking toward me, slowly at first, his steps deliberate. Then he broke into a run, shouting something. His voice was loud, frantic, but I couldn't make out the words over the music in my ears and the pounding of my own heart. I didn't stop to think. I was already close to the residential road, so I sped up, my legs moving faster than I thought they could. My earphones slipped out, dangling against my chest as I focused on getting out of the woods. I crossed the main road, rounded a corner, and ducked behind a fence, crouching low. My breath was ragged, my hands trembling as I peered through the slats. The man had reached the edge of the tree line. He stood there, looking around, his head swiveling as if searching for me. Then, just as suddenly, he turned and disappeared back into the woods, the fire's light swallowing him up. I didn't wait to see if he'd come back. I bolted, my feet pounding the pavement as I made a beeline for home. The 5-minute walk felt like seconds, adrenaline pushing me forward. I got inside, locked the door, and collapsed against it, my heart still racing. I didn't tell anyone what happened, not my parents, not my friends. It felt too surreal, like something out of a nightmare. After that night, I never walked through the wooded area alone again. If I had to walk home, I took the longer route through the park, even if it meant adding 20 minutes to my journey. I never saw that man again, and I'm glad I didn't. I'm at a different college now, studying a new course, and I don't go near that park anymore. I doubt I ever will. The memory of that night still lingers, though. The flickering fire, the black trash bags, the sound of his footsteps behind me. It's not something you forget. I'm a male nurse working in the emergency room at a large hospital in San Francisco. My wife is a nurse too, but she works in labor and delivery on a different floor. We both love our jobs, even though they're intense, especially on holidays like Thanksgiving. That night, as usual, the ER was a madhouse, patients pouring in with everything from minor injuries to life-threatening emergencies. Labor and delivery wasn't any quieter, with babies being born left and right. My wife and I always try to sneak away for a quick break together during our shifts, maybe grab a bite in the hospital cafeteria, or just catch our breath for a few minutes. But on this night, we hadn't had a chance to connect at all. I was in the middle of the chaos when my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was her. I figured she was calling to say she'd finally gotten a moment to meet up for some food. I answered, expecting her usual calm voice, but instead, I heard a man screaming profanities in the background, his voice raw and unhinged. My wife, who's fluent in Spanish, was trying to soothe him, her tone firm but steady, the way she talks when she's handling a tense situation. "My pager's not working," she said quickly, her voice cutting through the noise. "We need security up here, Stat." My heart sank. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need to. The panic in her voice was enough. I hung up, immediately called for security, and shouted to the other nurses in the ER what was happening. My wife's in trouble in labor and delivery. I didn't wait for their response. I sprinted out of the ER, my sneakers pounding against the linoleum as I raced toward the elevators. The hospital corridors blurred past me, my mind flooded with worst-case scenarios. Was she okay? Was she hurt? I couldn't shake the sound of that man's voice, raging in the background. When I reached the labor and delivery ward, I nearly collided with him. He was standing in the hallway, his presence filling the space like a storm cloud. He wasn't huge, but he was built, muscular in a way that suggested street fights, not gym sessions. His arms and neck were covered in prison tattoos, intricate and faded, marking him as someone who'd lived a hard life. He was clearly a gangbanger, and the air around him crackled with menace. I'm no slouch, I work out regularly, but I knew in an instant this guy could take me apart if he wanted to. He locked eyes with me and flashed a sick, twisted grin, like he was sizing me up and enjoying it. Then he started walking toward me, spouting off in Spanish. I'm not fluent, but I caught enough to make my blood run cold. Threats, violent promises, words that carried the weight of someone who'd acted on them before. I started backing up, my heart hammering in my chest, my eyes darting for an escape. The door to the ER was behind me, but it was locked, a security measure to keep unauthorized people out. I fumbled for my badge and started buzzing the door frantically, my fingers shaking as I pressed the button over and over. He was closing in, less than a foot away now, his grin widening as he saw my panic. I could smell the sweat and anger radiating off him. Just as I thought I was out of time, the ER door buzzed open, and a doctor yanked me inside, pulling me to safety. The gangbanger lunged forward, slamming his fists against the reinforced glass door. He pounded it a few times, his face contorted with rage, then dragged his finger across his throat in a slow, deliberate gesture, still grinning at me and the doctor. It was a promise, and it chilled me to my core. Before he could do anything else, police officers flooded the corridor, their radios crackling as they moved in. I didn't stick around to see what happened next. I pushed past the doctor and ran to find my wife. She was in labor and delivery, shaken but unharmed, her face pale as she recounted what had gone down. A 14-year-old girl had been brought in, feverish, vomiting, her belly distended. The gangbanger had claimed to be her brother. At first, they thought she might be pregnant, but when they did an ultrasound, the truth was far worse. She wasn't carrying a baby. She had bags of drugs packed inside her stomach, a common tactic used by drug mules crossing the border from Mexico. When the medical team informed the man that his sister needed emergency surgery and that he wouldn't be getting his drugs back, he lost it. That's when he started screaming, threatening everyone in sight, and that's when my wife called me. The girl survived the surgery, thank God, but her story didn't have a happy ending. She'd likely be deported as soon as she recovered, sent back to whatever desperate circumstances had led her to this point. I held my wife for a long time after that, both of us rattled by how close things had come to disaster. We went back to work eventually. There's no time to dwell in a hospital, but that night stayed with us. The image of that man's grin, the sound of his fists against the door, the fear in my wife's voice, they're burned into my memory. It was just another Thanksgiving shift in the ER, but it was one I'll never forget. I'm a female corrections officer, or CO, working in a state with a fair number of death row inmates, though executions are rare. These days, I work for a different agency, but my first job as a CO was at a large county jail, one of the oldest in the country. Back then, I was fresh out of retail and customer service jobs, still studying criminal justice and greener than green. I'd only been on the job for a few months, and I was still adjusting to the reality of working in a place like that. I used to be very liberal, still am in many ways, but the job changes you. One belief I held strongly back then was that no human could be truly evil. That changed. The jail had a mix of modern and ancient sections, and parts of it were laid out in a linear design. Long corridors with cells on either side, nicknamed the condos by the staff. I'm using a fake name for it here to avoid identifying the place, as the real term is specific to that facility. These linear setups are outdated for a reason. You can't see every cell at once, but every inmate can see you. Walking those corridors felt like being on display, and the atmosphere was always heavy, especially in the condos. The fluorescent lights buzzed constantly, and the air carried the stale smell of sweat and cleaning chemicals. It was creepy, no question. Less than a decade ago, a horrific crime had shaken the area near where I grew up, a quadruple stabbing that the media called a butchery. The killer, a man named Michaels, had murdered his ex-girlfriend, her family, and their neighbor. When police found him, drenched in blood, they asked what happened. His response was chilling. It's obvious. I just killed everyone. They said he delivered the line without a flicker of emotion, his face blank as stone. That case stuck with me, not just because of its brutality, but because Michaels ended up in our jail as a pre-trial detainee. I've been a CO for about 4 months when he arrived. We'd had murderers before, plenty of them, but Michaels was different. Stabbings, for one, suggest a more personal, volatile kind of violence than a shooting, and his complete lack of remorse set him apart. He was considered high risk, so we placed him in an observation cell in the middle of the condos, where a CO could always keep an eye on him. His cell had a thick glass door, and he'd stand there for hours silent, just watching everyone who passed by. His presence was like a weight, pressing down on the entire unit. Michaels was skinny, white, with unremarkable brown hair, but there was something about him that made your skin crawl. He rarely spoke, except during visits. And he had visitors, lots of them. A steady stream of women, mostly big goth types, would show up, claiming they were in love with him. I don't know if it meant anything, but his ex-girlfriend had been a larger woman, and he had a habit of drawing sketches of the heavier female COs, leaving the pictures on his cell ledge for us to find. It was unsettling, like he was studying us. That day, I was working as a utilities officer, a floater role where you cover breaks, help out where needed, and if you're lucky, sneak in some downtime. Utilities officers could get away with a lot of chatting and slacking off, especially in a jail like ours where there were quiet corners to hide in. I was hanging out at one end of the condos, a spot where you could see down the corridor and catch a glimpse of the rest of the jail. I was talking to another CO, swapping stories to pass the time. Jails are like echo chambers. There are no secrets. Sound carries, and you learn quickly that inmates can overhear things, especially in the condos where the cells are close and the walls seem to amplify whispers. But we were being careful, keeping our voices low, and we were a good 50 yards from Michael's observation cell. Plus, the angle made it nearly impossible for him to see us unless he pressed his face right against the glass and craned his neck. I was telling the other CO a funny story about my weekend with my fiancée at the time. It wasn't anything too personal, just a long, silly anecdote about something that had happened. I wouldn't share stories like that on a unit now. Experiences made me more cautious, but back then I was naive. We wrapped up our chat because I had to head to the gate to relieve another officer for chow. To get there, I had to walk past Michael's cell. I hated that part of the job. He'd stand at his glass door, staring, his head tilted slightly down so you could see the whites under his irises. It was like looking into a void. I wasn't great at hiding my nervousness back then, and I'm sure he could sense it. Most days, he didn't say a word, but this time was different. As I took a step past his cell, I heard a faint whisper. Edgecombe. My last name, barely audible, like a breath against the glass. I froze. I didn't even know he knew my name. Sure, our last names are on our uniforms, but I'd never been his primary officer. We'd never spoken, never interacted. His voice caught me so off guard that, instead of ignoring it like I should have, I stopped and backtracked to his door. He pressed his face closer to the glass, his lips almost touching it, and I leaned in, my heart pounding. His eyes were so dark, like they swallowed the light, and I felt pinned, hypnotized, like a mouse in front of a snake. Then he started talking. In a low, deliberate voice, he recited the exact story I just told the other CO at the end of the condos. Word for word, mimicking my tone, my cadence, even the subtle lisp I've always been self-conscious about. It wasn't just the words. He captured the rhythm of how I'd told it, the pauses, the inflections. It felt like he'd crawled inside my head. The whole thing seemed to stretch on forever, though it couldn't have been more than a minute. I stood there paralyzed, the 22 millimeters of glass between us feeling like nothing at all. I was just a 5-foot-tall woman, and he was a murderer who'd butchered 4 people without blinking. In that moment, for the first time in my life, I thought, asterisk, this is evil. This is unfixable, asterisk, not troubled, not misunderstood, evil, in a way that felt almost inhuman. Finally, I snapped out of it and forced myself to speak. Sir, did you need something? My voice was shaky, but I clung to protocol, trying to reassert control. He didn't answer. He just started laughing, a loud, hysterical cackle that echoed down the corridor. It wasn't amusement. It was something darker, like he was laughing at the world itself. I turned and walked away, my legs unsteady, his laughter ringing in my ears. I've been through a lot since then. I've been assaulted by inmates, had urine thrown in my eyes, dealt with mind games and manipulation on a daily basis. I've met some talented lip readers too, but none of them ever came close to what Michaels did. That moment was different, like brushing up against something not entirely human. I work at a maximum security prison now, surrounded by rapists, murderers, and pedophiles, but nothing has ever matched the dread I felt standing outside his cell. Michaels is in another institution now, on death row. He's refused to appeal his sentence, not out of remorse. He's made it clear he has none, but because, in his mind, it's the most logical choice. He told the press he doesn't care, that dying is just the next step. It's been 5 years, and that encounter still haunts me. It wasn't the most traumatic thing I've experienced, but it's the one that lingers, the one that makes me question what I used to believe about human nature. Although I grew up in the capital of my country, my family owns a house on one of the many islands where my grandmother was raised. We inherited the place, a charming but weathered seaside cottage, and every summer we'd pack our bags and head there for vacation. The island is breathtaking. Crystalline waters, golden beaches, and lush greenery that make it a world-famous tourist destination. But the locals are different, shaped by a dark history. Centuries ago, pirates used the island as a dumping ground for the women and children they kidnapped, returning periodically to assault them. This grim origin story left a mark on the island's population, and one particular village has an even stranger reputation. Whispers of incest and odd behavior cling to it, and you can feel an unsettling aura the moment you step foot there. The people there often seem off, like they're carrying secrets no outsider could understand. As a tourist, you might not notice, but if you spend enough time on the island, it's impossible to miss. I was 16 that summer, and my younger sister was 14. It was 2011, and we were carefree, spending our days lounging on the beach and our nights exploring the island's vibrant social scene. We were too young to fully grasp the island's darker undertones, and the low crime rate made it feel safe. Our parents were relaxed about us staying out late, trusting the island's reputation as a secure haven. We had cell phones, not smartphones, just basic ones, but we often ran out of credit since call rates were expensive and our pocket money was limited. That meant we were frequently cut off from calling or texting, a common annoyance for teenagers back then. One night, we were hanging out at the port near our house, a lively spot where locals and visitors mingled under the glow of string lights and the hum of scooters. That's when we met a group of locals, all around 20 years old, who seemed friendly and approachable. There were 5 of them, 3 guys named Manos, Takas, and Stavros, and 2 sisters, Tina and Elsa, who looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine with their long blonde hair and model-like features. The guys were typical island boys, tanned, confident, zipping around on scooters. We were thrilled when they invited us to hang out with them. It felt exciting, like we were being welcomed into the local scene. We started drinking together, passing around bottles of cheap wine as we laughed and chatted by the water. The conversation flowed easily, and when they suggested we head to their village, the one with a strange reputation, to hang out at Tina and Elsa's house, we didn't think twice. The sisters had a car, so they offered to drive us, while the guys followed on their scooters. The drive was short but winding, the narrow roads flanked by dense vegetation and the occasional flicker of distant house lights. My sister and I were buzzing with excitement, oblivious to any red flags. When we arrived at the house, though, the mood shifted. The place was small, cramped, and dirty, with a stale, unpleasant smell that hit us the moment we stepped inside. It wasn't just untidiness. There was something wrong about the house, like it hadn't been cared for in years. The air felt heavy, and a faint but foul odor wafted from the backyard. My sister and I exchanged a glance, both of us sensing that something was off. I wanted to leave right then, but I didn't want to seem rude, and besides, we didn't have a car to get back. We were stuck. Tina and Elsa gave us a quick tour of the house, their voices cheerful but oddly detached. When we reached their parents' bedroom, my stomach churned. There were bloodstains on the bed, dark, unmistakable splotches on the sheets. Tina noticed us staring and quickly swapped out the sheets, tossing the stained ones into a corner. "Oh, don't worry," she said casually. "Our dad got into a fight recently and was bleeding everywhere." She spoke like it was no big deal, but her nonchalance only made it worse. My sister pressed closer to me, her fear palpable. I could feel my own pulse racing, but I tried to stay calm, not wanting to escalate the situation. We moved to the living room, where the guys were sprawled out, lighting up a joint. The smell of weed mixed with the house's underlying stench, making the air feel thick and suffocating. They passed the joint to us, insisting we take a hit. We politely declined, both of us instinctively wanting to stay sharp. But they kept pushing, their tone shifting from friendly to insistent, until it felt like we had no choice. I took a small puff but didn't inhale, just letting the smoke sit in my mouth before blowing it out. My sister, though, didn't know that trick. She took a real hit and got high almost immediately, her eyes glazing over as she slumped into the couch. Panic clawed at me. I had to get us out of there. Takas slid onto the couch next to me, his body too close, his voice low and flirty. Across the room, Stavros was doing the same to my sister, leaning in and touching her in ways that made my skin crawl. She was too out of it to push him away, her movement sluggish. I shoved Takas back, my voice sharp. "I have a boyfriend," I lied, hoping it would deter him. He just smirked, unfazed, and leaned closer. My heart pounded as I watched Manos move toward my sister, kissing her while Stavros's hands roamed over her. She was barely conscious, her head lolling to the side. I stood up abruptly, muttering something about needing the bathroom, and bolted down the hall. My mind was racing, searching for a way out. The bathroom was small and grimy, with a second door leading to the backyard. The smell in there was overwhelming, a rancid mix of decay and filth that made my stomach lurch. I cracked open the back door, hoping for an escape route, and the odor hit me like a wall. I gagged, covering my mouth as I stepped outside. The backyard was a mess, piled high with trash bags and debris. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A dead cat, its belly sliced open, surrounded by her unborn kittens, also dead. The wounds weren't natural. They were deliberate, made with a knife. I vomited into the trash, my knees buckling as the horror sank in. My mind screamed at me to run, but I couldn't leave my sister behind. The backyard had an exit to the main street, a narrow gate half hidden by overgrown weeds. It was our way out, but I had to get my sister first. I forced myself to pull it together, wiping my mouth and rushing back to the living room, trying to act normal despite the terror coursing through me. When I got there, the scene was worse than I'd feared. Everyone was crowded around my sister, their hands all over her. Stavros' hand was inside her pants, and she was starting to sober up, her voice weak but desperate. "Please, no, I don't want to," she whimpered. Manos laughed, his voice cold. "Shut up. You'll like it." I froze. My body locked in place as fear and helplessness overwhelmed me. Takas stood up, grabbing my arm to pull me into their twisted game. I was about to scream when, miraculously, my sister saved us. Her face went pale, and she choked out, "I need to vomit." It wasn't a lie. She looked like she was about to collapse. The group recoiled, not wanting to deal with a mess, and let her go. She stumbled to the bathroom, and I ran after her, my heart in my throat. She barely made it to the toilet before throwing up, her body shaking as she clutched the sink. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed her arm, whispering, "We're leaving." Now, she was still woozy, barely able to stand, but I dragged her through the bathroom's back door, past the horrific scene in the backyard, and out the gate to the main street. The cool night air hit us, and I kept pulling her along, her feet dragging as she struggled to keep up. We had no phone credit to call for help, so I flagged down a woman passing by and begged to use her phone. My hands were shaking as I dialed our parents, my voice cracking as I told them where we were and that we needed them to pick us up. They were alarmed, their voices tight with worry, but they didn't ask questions. They just told us to stay put. When they arrived, we collapsed into the car, and I spilled everything. The house, the bloodstains, the dead cat, the way the group had turned on us. My parents were horrified, their faces pale as they listened. For the next few years, they kept us on a tight leash, their trust and our judgment shaken. We were naive, stupid even to follow strangers like that, but we were just teenagers, caught up in the thrill of the moment. Looking back, the danger we put ourselves in makes me shudder. My parents considered calling the police, but we later learned the girl's father was involved in drug dealing, and in a country where corruption runs deep, the police aren't always a safe option. Instead, we rented out the house and never returned to the island for vacation. My sister and I are different now. Warier, more suspicious, always on guard. We escaped and we learned our lesson, but I'll always wish we'd never met those people. The memory of that night, the smell, the fear, the moment I realized how close we came to something unspeakable, still haunts me. When I was 12, my great-uncle John came from Ukraine to visit us in Canada. He was a quiet man with a weathered face, the kind that told you he'd lived through things most people couldn't imagine. Over dinner, he'd share stories from his life, each one more gripping than the last. But one tale from the late 1960s stood out, chilling me to the bone. It was about a night he barely survived, a brush with danger that still haunted him decades later. John was traveling by train from his village to another to visit family. The journey required a transfer at a remote station, little more than a concrete platform in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense woods and a single dirt road leading into the darkness. When he arrived, the platform was deserted. No staff, no other passengers, just the whistle of the wind and the creak of the train as it pulled away. He checked the schedule and settled in to wait for his connecting train, his suitcase at his feet, the cold already seeping through his coat. Time dragged on, but no train came. The winter sky darkened, the temperature plummeted, and John started to worry. He had no food, no shelter, and the prospect of spending the night on that desolate platform was looking more real by the minute. Just as he was resigning himself to a long, hungry night, a figure emerged from the twilight, an old woman, her back stooped, her face half hidden by a shawl. She approached him slowly, her footsteps crunching on the frozen ground. "Are you waiting for the train to such and such?" she asked, her voice raspy but kind. John nodded, explaining his situation. She shook her head. That train won't come until tomorrow. You'll freeze out here." Then she offered him a meal and a bed for the night at her house, about an hour's walk down the dirt road. In that part of the USSR, staying with locals was common for travelers, especially in rural areas with no inns or hostels. Grateful for the chance to avoid a night in the cold, John accepted without hesitation. He picked up his suitcase, and they set off together into the forest. The path was narrow, barely more than a trail, flanked by towering trees that blocked out the stars. The woman moved steadily despite her age, her lantern casting a faint glow that bobbed in the darkness. John followed, his breath visible in the frigid air, his legs aching from the uneven ground. The walk felt endless, the silence broken only by the crunch of their steps and the occasional rustle of branches. By the time they reached her house, a small two-story structure that looked like it had been there for centuries, John was exhausted, his stomach growling, his body craving warmth. Inside, the house was sparsely furnished, with creaky wooden floors and walls that seemed to absorb the light. The woman lit a few oil lamps, their flickering glow revealing a modest kitchen and a narrow staircase. She warmed up a pot of borscht, the rich smell of beets and cabbage filling the air. As they sat at the table, John finally got a good look at her. His heart skipped a beat. The old woman wasn't a woman at all. She was a man, his features sharp and masculine beneath the shawl, his hands rough and calloused. The realization hit John like a punch, but he was too tired, too hungry to confront it. He didn't want to pry or offend his host, so he pushed the unease aside, focusing on the steaming bowl in front of him. The borscht was hearty, and he ate quickly, grateful for the warmth it brought to his body. When he finished, he asked where he'd be sleeping. The man led him upstairs to a tiny room with a single bed, a small window, and nothing else. No chair, no table, just bare walls and a threadbare blanket. John thanked him, his voice polite but strained, the unease creeping back. They said good night, and the man closed the door. Then, to John's horror, he heard the unmistakable click of a lock. The door was bolted from the outside, trapping him in the dark. John's pulse quickened. He called out, his voice echoing in the small room. "Hello? Why'd you lock the door?" No response. The house was silent, not even the creak of footsteps. His mind raced. Had it been a mistake? Was the man just overly cautious? But the locked door felt deliberate, and the realization that he was alone, miles from help, sank in. He tried the door, rattling the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The window was his only hope. He crossed the room and tugged at it, but it was nailed shut, the frame old but unyielding. Panic started to build, but before he could think of another plan, he felt a sudden, urgent need to pee. There was no bathroom in the room, no chamber pot in sight. Desperate, John dropped to his knees and felt under the bed, hoping to find something he could use. His fingers brushed against something cold and stiff, a body. His heart stopped. He yanked his hand back, his breath catching in his throat. "No," he whispered to himself, the word a reflex to keep the terror at bay. His mind screamed at him to act, to get out, but he knew breaking the window would make too much noise. If the man or anyone else was downstairs, they'd hear him before he could escape. John forced himself to think. He couldn't stay in a room, he'd be a sitting duck. But he couldn't risk the window yet either. Then an idea hit him, born of desperation. He pulled the body from under the bed, its weight heavy and limp, the smell of decay faint but unmistakable. With trembling hands, he heaved it onto the mattress and covered it with a blanket, arranging it to look like a sleeping figure. Then he slid under the bed, curling into the tight space, his suitcase pressed against his side. He lay there, barely breathing, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure it would give him away. Time crawled. The darkness under the bed was suffocating, the floor cold against his body. He waited, every creak of the house amplifying his fear. About an hour later, he heard its slow, deliberate footsteps climbing the stairs. The sound was methodical, each step heavier than the last. The lock clicked, and the door creaked open. In the dim light spilling from the hallway, John saw a pair of boots move toward the bed. His breath hitched as the figure paused, then raised a large crowbar. The air split with sickening thuds as the figure struck the body on the bed, over and over, the sound wet and brutal. The crowbar clattered to the floor, landing inches from John's face. He bit his lip to keep from gasping. The figure stood still for a moment, then turned and left, closing the door without locking it. The footsteps retreated down the stairs, and the house fell silent again. John didn't move right away, his body frozen with fear. When he was sure the figure was gone, he slid out from under the bed, his muscles aching, his hands shaking. He grabbed the crowbar, its weight reassuring in his grip, and moved to the window. Using the tool, he pried at the nails, working as quietly as he could. The wood groaned, but the nails gave way one by one. His heart was in his throat, every second feeling like an eternity as he imagined the man returning. Finally, the window opened. John tossed his suitcase out, not caring where it landed, and dove after it, tumbling into the snow below. He landed hard, pain shooting through his ankle, but adrenaline dulled it. He scrambled to his feet, grabbed his suitcase, and ran, not looking back. The house stood dark and silent behind him as he sprinted across a field, his eyes locked on a cluster of lights in the distance. They turned out to be a highway, where military transport trucks rumbled by. John flagged one down, his voice hoarse as he begged for a ride. The driver, seeing his panic, let him climb in and took him to a nearby village where he could catch a train. John never reported what happened. In the USSR at the time, going to the authorities could backfire, and he feared he'd end up in trouble himself. He thanked God for his escape and vowed never to take that route again. The memory of that night, the locked door, the body under the bed, the sound of the crowbar, stayed with him, a shadow that never fully faded. When he told us the story, his eyes were distant, his voice steady but heavy, as if he could still feel the cold of that platform, the weight of that crowbar, the terror of knowing how close he'd come to not making it out. When I was 3 years old, my parents moved our family into a new neighborhood. The house was old but charming, with creaky wooden floors, high ceilings, and a big backyard that seemed like a playground to a kid like me. The neighborhood was a mix of all sorts, young families looking for affordable homes, older folks who'd lived there for decades, and renters scraping by on tight budgets. It was a diverse, bustling place, full of life, and my parents were excited to start fresh there. But from the moment we settled in, strange things started happening, things that, at first, they chalked up to my overactive imagination. I was a lively kid, always dreaming up stories and playing pretend, so when my dad started noticing odd behaviors, he didn't think much of it. He'd hear me giggling and laughing in my room, even when I was alone. When he'd poke his head in and ask, "What's so funny, kiddo?" I'd beam and say, "The kids are being funny." He'd smile, assuming I was talking about imaginary friends, and ruffle my hair before leaving me to my games. It happened often, bursts of laughter echoing from my room, my voice chattering away as if I were holding a conversation with someone he couldn't see. Then there were the nights he'd find me curled up in my closet, fast asleep. It wasn't just once or twice. It became a pattern. He'd wake me gently, confused, and ask why I wasn't in my bed. I'd mumble something about feeling safer there, my small hands clutching my blanket. My parents exchanged worried glances but figured it was just a phase, maybe a quirk of adjusting to a new house. Kids do strange things, right? They'd tuck me back into bed, hoping I'd grow out of it. But the most troubling behavior was my absolute refusal to walk through the front door. Every time we needed to leave or come home, I'd throw a fit, screaming, crying, kicking until one of my parents scooped me up and carried me across the threshold. It wasn't just stubbornness. It was raw, visceral fear. I'd cling to them, my little body trembling, my eyes wide as if something terrifying waited just beyond the door. My parents tried everything, bribes, gentle coaxing, even stern words, but nothing worked. They had to carry me in and out, every single time. The front door opened into a small foyer. To the right was a coat closet, its door always slightly ajar, revealing a jumble of jackets and shoes. To the left was a low brick wall, about 4 feet high and 3 feet long, that separated the foyer from the living room. It was a decorative divider, nothing special, with a smooth surface and a few potted plants my mom had placed on top to brighten the space. But I hated it. I'd shrink away from it, refusing to touch it or even stand near it. If my parents tried to set me down close to the wall, I'd wail, my tiny hands flailing as I begged to be picked up again. They couldn't understand it. To them, it was just a wall, an unremarkable piece of the house's quirky design. We'd been living there for a few months when my dad decided to tackle some renovations. The house was old, with outdated fixtures and walls that needed freshening up. One of his projects was to tear down that brick divider in the foyer. He thought it would open up the space, make the living room feel bigger, and maybe even help with my strange aversion to the front door. The day he planned to do it, my parents dropped my brother and me off at our grandparents' house so we wouldn't be underfoot while he worked. They figured it would be a quick job, and we'd be back home by evening. But we ended up staying with our grandparents for a week, and when my parents finally told me why, years later, I understood the gravity of what had happened. My dad started demolishing the brick wall that morning, his sledgehammer cracking through the mortar with satisfying thuds. Dust filled the air, and the living room was a mess of debris. But as the wall came down, he froze. Inside the hollow space between the bricks, hidden from view, were bones, small, fragile bones that looked disturbingly human. His stomach churned as he realized they weren't animal remains. They were the bones of children, carefully concealed within the structure of the wall. He called the police immediately, his hands shaking as he dialed. The house became a crime scene, with officers and forensic experts swarming the place. They confirmed the bones belonged to at least 2 children, though the exact number was hard to determine due to the fragmentation. The discovery was chilling, made worse by the fact that no one could say how long the bones had been there or who had put them there. The house had changed hands many times over the years, owned by a string of families and landlords who rented it out to countless tenants. The police investigated, but the trail was cold. No records pointed to a clear suspect, and the case remained unsolved, just another dark mystery in a town that had its share of them. My parents were rattled. They didn't tell me or my brother at the time. We were too young to understand, but the discovery shook their sense of safety. They couldn't look at the house the same way, knowing what had been hidden in its walls. My strange behaviors suddenly made sense to them. The laughter, the nights in the closet, the terror at the front door. They wondered if I'd sensed something they couldn't, some lingering presence tied to the bones. They never said it outright, but I could tell they believed the house was wrong, tainted by whatever had happened there. We moved out not long after, leaving the house and its secrets behind. My parents never talked much about it, but I could see the weight it left on them. As I grew older, they shared the full story, and I pieced together the fragments of my own memories. I don't know if I really saw or heard anything as a 3-year-old, but the fear I felt at that front door, the way I'd shy away from that brick wall, it stayed with me. To this day, I wonder about those bones, about the children they belonged to, and about what kind of person could do something so horrific. The house still stands, as far as I know, but I'll never go back. Some places hold on to their darkness, and that one, I'm certain, always will.